listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix. It is time once again for the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan.
And I'm former CIA officer John Kiriakou.
And this is The Backstory. And you know, here's what happens, John. When you try to fix things technically, things that are technical in nature, like the video system, let's say, that we use.
Indeed.
When you try to fix things, you end up breaking them. This is, and by the way, you know, I've been doing video. Do you know how long I've been doing video professionally? It's really frightening if I think about it. Ready? 42 years.
Oh, yeah, that's frightening. Yes.
Because I worked on a show called Video West in San Francisco when I was 14 years old. So that's what I mean professionally. I was an intern on a Commander Cody music video, which, by the way, that music video from 1979 is now part of the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA. It's part of their permanent collection.
Oh, that's great.
It's pretty cool,
that is
right?
Great.
But
yeah.
So it makes me feel slightly less old to know that even though I've been doing video professionally for 42 years, I did start when I was 14, so whatever. But what I've learned is when you try to fix things, they just got a great new computer system at Sputnik. Andre, the chief engineer, I think is he the chief engineer? Or is he just the tallest one? He's the tallest one for sure.
Yes.
Yes, Andre's a big guy.
And a new father, by the way.
And a new father. And he also goes to the conventions. He goes to IBC, which is the big video convention that happens in Amsterdam every year.
Yes, he does. And I'll tell you the truth, when Andre posts stuff on Facebook, normally I don't know what the heck he's talking about.
Yes, no, he's very
way more technical than I am.
But so he's been studying. They got a new computer, but for some reason it's not seeing the video setup on this end, and I don't know why. And I'm sure our multifaceted engineer Saul, you don't know what's going on, right? Yes, he doesn't know.
That's a tough one.
But don't worry, you get to look at someone holding a cell phone, looking at a picture of me.
Right.
Maybe my face broke it because I did get a haircut today, John.
Excellent.
I braved I checked at one point it was 0. For New Year's Eve, it's going to be below 0 and snowing.
Oh, you know, usually, at least in the DC area, when it used to get super cold like that, it was so cold that it just wouldn't snow. It didn't snow. It was either or. You know, the snow would come in the 20s or maybe 30 degrees. But when it was really cold like that, we just didn't get any snow. Wow, that's rough. That's rough.
Yeah,
man.
but here's the thing. It just is what it is. So up here, no one goes, oh, my God, what are you going to do? You just go, it's a cold one. You know what I'm saying? That's what you do. You just go, it's a cold one. Because they get it every year. And by the way, they're saying, I was talking to one of the Lyft drivers from this morning, and they were saying it's supposed to be a cold one. I took a Lyft out to get some coffee because it was like 2 degrees. And I was like,
that's dangerous. Yeah, you can't do that. That's just dangerous.
Yeah, and I didn't. And let's talk about the show. Today on the show, we have Robert Bridge joining us straight out of Moscow. And once again, I am willing to bet, John, that it is colder here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota than it is in Moscow.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, because it always seems to be. But again, we don't get a lot of guests from Siberia.
No.
There are parts of Russia that are colder. And there are other parts, Sebastopol, I assume down in Crimea, that section of Russia, I say to make sure, I'm going to say it that way, just in case John Bolton's listening, I want him to have an aneurysm. Because, But I'll bet it's warmer down there because you're by the sea.
Sure.
Right?
That makes sense to me.
So we need to start building into the show the All Russia Weather Report. But anyway, Robert Bridge is in Moscow, and he'll be joining us in about 10 minutes, maybe 5 minutes now. Let me see. I've been talking for a while. Then, next hour, Ted Rall will be joining us, and we're taking your calls after, because again, whenever we get guests from Europe or Russia or whatever,
yes,
out of the country, then
that time difference is rough.
It is rough. It is rough, and it's not rough on us because for us it's just the afternoon, but for them, they can't do it. So anyway, we'll do 45 minutes open after Robert's on 202-521-1320. It's the backstory. Okay, so our multifaceted engineer, Saul, thinks that he may have, he thought he had a solution, but alas and alack, there is no solution. I'm just saying.
Well, what are you going to do?
Well, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to talk. Because really, all the video stuff that I do is a sideline. I don't, you know what I'm saying? I don't.
Yeah, it's a little added extra. A little treat for our listeners.
No, that's right. And I'm not complaining, John. But how much video production work do you do?
Zero.
That's right.
I didn't know we were on video until I had been doing the show for 2 months.
Yeah, and you can see that it's built up to quite a little production on this end because of the graphics and everything.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's nice.
But by the way, you doing no video production are on a par with every other host. I am the only host, possibly in all of talk radio, who does his own video graphics.
That's true.
And I guess it's a hobby for me. I guess that's what it is. Because if you're doing something you're not getting paid for it, that's a hobby, right?
It's a hobby. Yeah, that's right. That's right. If you're not getting paid, that's how the IRS looks at it. It's a hobby.
Right. So for IRS purposes, for Hunter Biden, crack wars are a hobby, not a profession, right?
That's right. That's right.
And it's their profession. I wonder if I wonder if there are any crack using prostitutes who declare Hunter Biden as a dependent. I'm curious. I don't know what the IRS.
There probably are crack whore using prostitutes who declare him as a source of income.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Revenue.
And, occasionally, and by the way, speaking of that's the president's son we're talking about, and there's nothing that we're saying that's inaccurate, even though it sounds like a tribute to Norm Macdonald, and it is in some ways, sure. Yes, and the use of the phrase crack whore, then if it's one word, cracker, that's different. But crack whore, that's a Norm Macdonald staple. And of course, Norm Macdonald was one of the people we lost this year. And we're at that time of the year, John, when one of the broadcast tropes are, who did we lose this year? Well, here's another question. Who did we lose yesterday? The answer is John Madden and Harry Reid.
And Harry Reid, that's right.
And Harry Reid, who of course was fictionalized in the great Martin Scorsese film Casino.
Yes.
We've talked about that, right? You know that, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In fact, I watched Casino again day before yesterday. One of the greatest movies ever.
Yeah, Casino and Goodfellas, those two are, whatever. Scorsese was on a roll.
Great works. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I only met Harry Reid a couple of times when I was working for John Kerry, but there was one thing that struck me about Reid. His reputation was that he was not just not a nice guy, that he was perfectly willing to ruin the remainder of your life if you didn't do what he demanded that you do, whatever it was, right? Vote this way, vote that way. And there were several times when I was in John Kerry's office with Kerry, talking about whatever, and Reid called. And I remember the first time that happened, the chief of staff came in and said, the leader's on the line. And that's how we referred to him, as the leader. And Kerry jumped out of his seat, jumped like physically, ran to the phone, picked it up and said, leader, how are you today? And I thought he was joking because it sounded so odd to address somebody as leader. And the rest of the call was, yes, leader. No, leader. Thank you, leader. Yes, leader. I'll get right on that, leader. And then he hung up the phone. And I realized he's not kidding. Now, this guy is John Kerry was one of the most important members of the U.S. Senate at the time, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the former chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and he's referring to Harry Reid as leader, 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 and hemming and hawing, and like he was nervous. And I thought, wow, that is power. Unbridled power.
What you missed was towards the end was when Harry Reid demanded to be called your leadership.
Yes. That was probably coming next.
Yeah, I made that up, but it's not really that far-fetched. That is weird. Yeah, that's weird. And it's one of those amazing but true Washington stories, that if you you've been in DC about 40 years, right?
39 years.
So not quite as long as I've been doing video production, sure, but pretty damn long.
Pretty damn long.
Because I moved around. You're pretty much there. So you have all these amazing stories, John, and it is always great when you're able to share them. But that is weird. Harry Reid got his start as a fighter, as a boxer.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. He was a boxer. Yeah. Crazy.
Much like, like Packy East, that boxer. Do you know who Packy East was?
I've heard the name Packy East.
That's a great boxer name, isn't it? Packy East. That was Bob Hope's boxing name.
Oh, my gosh. That's why I know it. Yes, it was Bob Hope's boxing name. I've seen pictures of Bob Hope with boxing gloves on.
Right. It's hard to picture because he always played, an abject coward.
Yeah.
That was his comic persona. By the way, who, and SCTV did a piece based on this, but Woody Allen said that his comic persona was based on Bob Hope and in the Hope and Crosby films.
Really?
Have you heard that? Yes.
No, I didn't know that. That's very interesting.
If you think about it, Woody Allen's basically doing a Bob Hope impression. And just because he's, New York, he's got a New York accent.
Right.
It sounds different. But he's clearly doing Bob Hope. That kind of, I got to get out of here kind of thing. Like and I'll tell you, Jack Benny used to do a similar kind of thing. But what Woody Allen's doing is Bob Hope. There you go. You learn something new every day here on The Backstory. Coming up, Robert Bridge, straight from Moscow. And we got a end-of-the-year trope, a report card on Joe Biden coming from our bridge right after this on The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back, and on the radio in the D.C. area, 105.5 FM, AM 1390. Joining us now from Moscow, writer, Robert, and author. I like pointing that out because he's got books under his belt, John. So he's no mere writer.
That's right.
I'm a writer occasionally. I got to start doing that again, but I'm not an author yet. I say yet.
Fun.
That's hope. That's what you're hearing there.
You'll get there.
Sort of a problem. Well, I think so. You know, it would take time away from doing graphics as a hobby. But Robert Bridge is joining us from Moscow, where I'll bet it's not like 5 degrees. I'll bet it's warmer than that, right, Robert?
I wish you were right, Lee. Nice to talk to you. It's actually, it's bitter cold here. I won't give you the full weather forecast, but it's very cold.
Okay, but so I'm in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and it's I'd have to look at it. Last time I looked, it was like 8 degrees Fahrenheit, because we don't do the Celsius thing. So is it colder or warmer in Moscow?
Well, to put it this way, down in the subtropics of Russia, which is like Sochi, where they have palm trees, it's actually +8 right there right now. Here,
wow.
Yeah, here you can't stay outside for like more than 10 minutes right now. It is just bitter cold. It just goes right through your clothes, your coat, and right into your bones. It's very, very cold. There's no climate change happening here.
Well, now, Robert, you made me very happy because I like to hear any place that's colder than where I am. So you're suffering there. I'm enjoying that. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Now, Robert, let's talk about, you've got a new piece up. It's over at RT, correct? Your Joe Biden report card. Tell people where they can find it.
They can find it at rt.com. You just click onto the op-ed section there and scroll down a little bit, and you should be able to find it. It's about, I don't know, 5 from the top, I suppose, at this time.
Now, we're going to go over a few things, and not surprisingly, John, Joe Biden's not doing real well grade-wise on the report card.
No.
And
no, I don't think Joe Biden's going to do terribly well on anybody's report card.
No, he's not. But, Robert did something very good in the article. The article's, again, go over to RT.com, check it out. One of the things he did was an expected grade and then his actual grade. I thought that was a clever idea, and instead of just, he went the extra mile on the report card there, Robert. Nice work.
Yeah, that's just some homework on my part.
Well, but let me start with the one where he got a surprisingly high grade, and because John Kiriaku's brother is a well-known music producer, explain how the hell, Joe Biden, you gave him an A on musicianship, Robert. Explain that one.
I think this one is kind of predictable. It happened with it happened at the what was it, the NASCAR race? Biden, he basically single-handedly provided the sole inspiration for one of the biggest pop solo hits of the year. I think we all know what this is going to be. I mean, the lyrics were a bit profane, but it took the music industry by storm. And I think it's called "Let's Go Brandon," I believe.
It could be. Another top 10 hit right now is called ABCDEFU. Have you seen? I couldn't make that up. Even if I did make that up, John, I'd have a hit. But that's a top 10 hit. So the "Let's Go Brandon" thing. Now, Joe Biden actually fell for that. He was doing the very important job of the president while pushing the country towards a war and pushing other countries towards a war, not just ours. But he was doing the thing at NORAD, John, watching Santa's progress. You saw this, and the guy who was on there with his kid ended up saying, "Let's go, Brandon," and Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Yeah, he went along with it. I don't think anybody gave him the memo. I don't think anybody gave him the memo on that, exactly what that means. But it was obvious that his wife understood. She buried her face and she understood what was going on. But poor Joe didn't seem to have a clue.
Well, John, you said, we've talked about how, by Biden saying, look, we're going to have 500 million tests for COVID-19. Oops, we don't have anywhere near that. Yeah. Biden is not being served well by his underlings, is he? You see what I'm saying, John?
I agree with you.
Yeah, and again, the buck stops with him. But Robert, isn't it obvious that the Biden administration, is awful? It's not just Joe Biden personally, but it's very inept as an administration. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, I try to give him the benefit of the doubt whenever I can, like with any administration. But what really bothers me is the hypocrisy, I think, like in terms of the border. And I talked about that. That was one of something. I mixed that in with the COVID pandemic and all that. The fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic and they haven't thought to seal the border with Mexico. And that's just, that is just so unbelievable. That would be the first thing that any country that was taking serious a pandemic would seek to do, is to stop the flow of people coming in. I mean, even liberals who are all in favor of protecting, and of course everybody's concerned about them, but you're supposed to go through the proper legal procedures to get into the country, and of course. But here we have a pandemic, and they've just left the door wide open. They're letting people in. They're flying them all around the country with very, very little testing, if any at all. You see them in the airports without their masks on, and meanwhile, Americans are locked down. in many places, many Democratic-run places. They're locked down. They can't go around. And so that's just classic hypocrisy, first off, and then just plain old dangerous. Second off, you could potentially spread. I mean, not only a virus, but terror. There is such a thing as terrorism as well. You have no idea who's coming through the border. So to me, that is just the height of stupidity, and it's something that very few countries would do. But for some reason, it's become acceptable now in the United States, apparently, to do this, at least with one half of the country.
Well, and the media is all in that one half because it's not getting reported on. What you're saying, right? I mean, John, it is insane, right? I mean, what Robert's talking about, he's whatever you think about this is not. It's not racist. It's not anti-immigration broadly, but this is freaking nuts, right?
Yeah, it is. It's nuts. And I think a lot of people would agree with you that it's nuts.
Yeah, I think even with the left, I think even the left would have to agree. And now you see crime rates going up. And of course, it's not all just due to the illegal migrants. I think that needs to be stressed. They're illegal migrants. These people are not coming in legally. They're not standing in line like our ancestors did, like my great-grandparents did at one time. They had to stand in line. They had to wait. They had to go through the whole process. Yeah. These people are just getting you cross the Rio Grande and boom, you're in. And it's just I have to criticize Trump a bit too on this whole thing. He promised to put the wall up, but that got bogged down, and like everything seems to do in the United States. I love my country, but wow, things just don't. A lot of things that you think will move quickly, they get bogged down in bureaucracy and in the Congress, and things that should just move quickly. I mean, not everything moves quickly in Russia, believe me, especially in the wintertime. But if there's something that people seem to be able to agree on things easier. I don't know exactly how to explain that. Maybe it's because it's more homogenous of a society. I don't know. But like, for example, with you had this, what was it? I'll just give you one example. Putin just pushed through, well, it wasn't that recently, it was about 5 years ago, but about, what was it? They called it the anti-gay. It was called the anti-gay law in the United States, but in reality, it was nothing like that. It was just a law that was aimed against promoting controversial topics of a sexual nature to children. And it was basically aimed at advertisers and different organizations. And it was amazing. Russia was able to, the party in power, the United Russia party was able to put it through. All of the Duma passed it in one day. There's no uproar in society. And, boom, it was in place. Now you can't have these types of messages aimed at children here. Just like that, overnight. There's no debate. I mean, very little debate. It was passed, I think, by like 98% of the Duma. So it's just kind of frustrating to me that things that are so obvious now have just become so bogged down and just ridiculous, just inanity. It just doesn't need to be. And it's just, I think it's really screwing up our country.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's funny, too, because we thought that, well, let me rephrase that. So many Americans thought that the Trump administration was so bad. There were so many problems, policy problems, personnel problems at the highest levels of government, that Joe Biden was going to be a savior, even if he did nothing. So he came into office. He's done practically nothing. Things are worse. His approval rate is 41%. Which is as low as any, recent president. Yeah, this is not looking good.
No, not at all. I mean, from here, it looks like, I don't know how bad it is there. I haven't been back in a while, but I'm hearing like, is it true that the store shelves are starting to look a little bit empty?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I went shopping today. I happened to be staying at my sister's house in New Hampshire. And so we went out shopping today, not special shopping, just for normal stuff. And there are shortages of the oddest things. Like, for example, we have a shortage of cream cheese. So people are hoarding cream cheese now. There's a shortage of Band-Aids. You can't find Band-Aids anywhere up here. There was something that I saw. What the heck was? Oh, no. Publication of my next 3 books. They were supposed to come out as a set on February 19th. It's been pushed back to April 22nd because there's no paper, right? And the paper that we do produce in the United States, it's not enough for publishers. It's being used for toilet paper and, newspapers or whatever. So book paper to publish books has to be shipped in from China. And because the supply chain is broken down, there's no paper to publish books. It's the craziest things.
Yeah, Trump had his faults, but you can't imagine something like that happening on his administration, on his watch. Just simple things like that, cargo ships being stuck in the Pacific. I can't understand that. Like, I understand that COVID, of course, had some part to play in all that, but to just imagine that all these workers are affected. I guess a part of it is because people are just quitting because they don't want to take, well, that's another subject, but don't want to get the vaccine. I don't know. I have no idea. It's just, to me, it's extremely strange that they could be letting that happening, having those cargo ships back.
Now, Robert, of course, Vladimir Putin had his big press event that he does once a year about a week ago. And did you see that? Did you watch much of that?
I got to watch a little bit of it, yeah. My bladder isn't as strong as Vladimir Putin's. I can't sit that long for 4 hours.
No, it is an epic thing. But what struck me because I was watching some of it too, people were asking. So this goes precisely to what you said, which is we don't have anything like that with any leaders having any interaction with any citizens like what I was seeing, and it's completely the opposite image of what Americans are told about Russia. But it seems like that's what Putin does at these things. And then he also does a big one where Johnny talks to people, where he takes phone calls from people.
Yeah. It is amazing. It is. It's something that's refreshing to see, and to imagine any Western leader or anywhere in the world, East even, sitting down and being able to have these marathon Q&A sessions for 4 hours straight. It just boggles the mind. It's really amazing, and I think that's why people really, a lot of people here really like the guy, and I guarantee you, those people who were complaining about their hospital, that those buildings were probably refurbished the next day if he was writing down notes about them. He's got a big following here, and I think it's really good. I think that's how if you want to call it democracy, yeah, it's democracy, and that's the essence of it, is that you have a leader who's able to, first of all, he's able to talk like that and juggle so many questions over such a for 4 hours juggling questions. That's like a mental gymnastics that I can't imagine too many people being able to do, even top scientists. So that alone is, and then the physical aspect of it as well. It's refreshing to see. And I was actually at this was a long time ago. This was back when I was the editor-in-chief of the Moscow News, which is now defunct, actually. But I was down in Sochi, and there was a Valdai conference, and we had all met it was the city of Sochi, and we met at a place, I think they called it the Sanatorium, and it was a big conference hall. We were all sitting around a huge table, and it was the same type of thing, except Putin was surrounded by journalists, and all Western journalists, and they were just firing all kind of questions at him. And but yet afterwards, it was the most amazing thing. I was in shock, actually. All these journalists who had been, go back home and they write negative stuff about him, they came up to him afterwards and were asking for selfies with them, getting their autograph with the guy.
Wow.
I mean, he looked like really like a rock star with the groupies around him. And I just stood off to the side, like with my jaw wide, like, what the heck? I was just in shock. And so that was pretty amazing to see. Even with the Western journalist and all the negative stuff that we can write about the guy, and still he had that ability to get people to so he has that I don't know what you'd call it, the cult of personality or something that comes around. I don't know, every once in a blue moon you get somebody like Putin coming along, and I think he's going to go down in history as one of the more I don't know, enigmatic, I guess you could say, leaders of our generation.
Yeah, I would agree with that, John. How do you think history is going to regard Vladimir Putin ultimately, if you had to guess? Which is all you can do.
I feel actually pretty strongly about this, Lee. I think that history is going to regard Vladimir Putin unlike in any way the New York Times and maybe the Washington Post. I think that Vladimir Putin is going to go down in history as an unusually patient leader, right? This is a guy whose country we promised NATO would not expand toward, and we broke that promise. It's a guy who the New York Times and the Washington Post and the White House constantly accused of warmongering, and who in the end will not have invaded anybody, while during the same period we invaded multiple countries. He's charismatic. Our friend Mark from Indiana just texted me to remind me. I'm glad he did. He's charismatic, unlike Joe Biden. Joe Biden's not charismatic. Donald Trump and Barack Obama were, sure, in their own ways. But he is charismatic. He's also the guy who repaired Russian relations with China and made that relationship one of the most significant on the entire planet. So I think that history is going to smile on Vladimir Putin. I think it's going to be pretty much the opposite of the way we see things here in the United States.
Yeah, and the only thing I was going to say is that he also, I'm not diminishing anything you're saying there. I'm not taking anything away from Vladimir Putin here. But he also looks better by contrast because we look really bad. On the Iran nuclear agreement that we pulled out of, that Donald Trump pulled out of.
Yeah.
Iran's been very clear right now. They don't want us back in. And what they've said was, and other leaders have noticed this too, is that we keep breaking agreements. The NATO thing is like I'll put it like this. We had other missile deals with Russia, treaties, that we just, we're out of that treaty. So Robert, we're also at a time, America does look unusually bad, if we're going to give things a report card, on a lot of different fronts, right?
Yeah, as far as, we mentioned it before about how, well, this was back in when the Soviet Union was just about ready to collapse. You had, who was it? I believe James Baker made a verbal promise, and that was probably the mistake on Russia's part, was that they didn't demand it in writing, but they made the mistake. John had mentioned this before, but Baker had pledged, at least this is what people at the meeting had said, that he had pledged to Russia that NATO would not advance 1 inch eastward towards Russia's borders. And since that day, I believe it was 1990, NATO has exploded. I think it took on another 15 countries, and you even have some countries that are actually right up against. You've got Estonia, you've got Latvia. These countries are literally on Russia's border. Poland, where they're hosting U.S. soldiers. So you could see Russia's concern. And if NATO gets into, for example, Ukraine, then you're right smack on Russia's border. I think that's what they're, of course, really concerned about, is if you start getting this sophisticated weaponry right on Russia's border, the ability for Russia to respond in some kind of hypothetical scenario where they're attacked, that's the way they got to think. You got to think defensively, of course. It would be impossible to repel something like that. They wouldn't have time to get up their anti-missiles, anti-defense missile system going. And so you need that buffer zone. And that's the problem right now. They see that buffer zone is being steadily eroded. And so that's a big problem. And now they're taking it quite seriously. And they've made a statement that if something will happen, I don't, who knows what, but they're taking it quite seriously now. And they're making it known to NATO that they're absolutely not going to accept any more eastward progression from the military bloc. So we'll see what happens. Not a very good situation, though.
Yeah, John?
Do you see any hopes for improvement? I ask every guest that we have who's an expert on Russia this question. Do you see any hope for improvement in relations between the U.S. and Russia in the near term? And when I say the near term, I mean, let's say the remainder of the Biden administration. It seems like it's not just Ukraine, but we're on edge over the Baltic states. We're on edge over Georgia. We're on edge over the stands, as we used to call them in government, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. Is there any reason to be optimistic?
I really want to be, but there's just been so much negative press against Russia, and it's so difficult to overcome that. And even with the whole thing with Russiagate, how they accused Moscow of interfering, and even though they proved that was the whole thing with the Steele dossier and all that they basically proved that was just ridiculous and nonsense. But still, people have that in the back of their mind. And one thing that really bothers me too, it's the way that we're able to. It's a trick the media plays. I don't know how intentional it is, but it happens where they put out a story, they'll accuse Russia of doing something, or anybody of doing something, and then it's discredited. They realize that it was a fake, and then they come out and they pull the story, but yet that still stays in people's minds. A lot of people don't see the correction, and so that's something. It's really the media has such a massive impact on the relations, and I think it was just a normal people-to-people type of relationship, then everything would be fine. But for whatever reason, there are elements, perhaps on both sides. I don't want to just blame the United States for that, but where you do have this lingering. Probably a lot of it goes back to the Cold War. Still have some of those feelings left over. So you have that lingering sense of resentment and scorn and even hatred, I suppose, that continues on both sides. There are some things that really, and actually me living here worries me. I see this whole, and I'm sure it worries you guys as well, is this insanity involving woke culture and progressive liberalism. And these are just things that sitting here in Moscow and reading about some of the things that are happening in our school system, although Russian schools aren't perfect either, but they're not promoting these ideas, these really serious issues about sexuality and all this stuff to children, to elementary school kids, and taking them to, what is it? They have this library. What is that called? I forget exactly what it is. Guys are dressing up like women, and they're reading to them in libraries and things like that.
Drag Queen Story Hour.
There you go. Yeah.
Right.
Things like this. It's just so bizarre and completely. I mean, when I was growing up, we had nothing like this. It was just school was school. You learned the basics, and it wasn't about all this indoctrination. And so a lot of that. And you got the transgender thing going, you got guys competing with women in the Olympics. So that's a concern for Russia. That was brought up actually during Putin's meeting, and he came out and just said, hey, I look at mom is mom and dad is dad, and that's the way the Russians look at it. It's just like, so right now there's just like this attitude, like how in the world could people think this way? What's going on? And to the Russian mentality, it's such a hard
thing. Robert, we are out of time. Fantastic appearance as usual, and you have set us up very well because, John, when we come back, here's an interesting question. If you were in a room in Russia for public relations, I would say you have zero chance with Democrats and a much better chance with the Republicans. We'll talk about that when we come back on The Backstory.
Every day we ask questions.
How is Facebook going to prevent suicides?
Well, do you see this as being a human rights violation?
Are the cows really stinking up the planet that much?
To move ideas forward.
A gravitational wave is a ripple in the fabric of space and time.
I don't think the launch of the satellite proves anything at all.
Where do good ideas come from? We connect with independent thinkers, hear their ideas, and create stimulating debates on real issues.
The Dow is in a correction. As I said, commodities across the globe are collapsing. Why is that the case? Because we are in a global recession.
That is set to change because Iran has approximately about 50 million barrels, which it had put in storage during the height of the sanctions regime, and that's ready to be released as soon as possible.
Where is the money?
The super rich individuals and the world's biggest companies are able to hide money in tax havens.
Is there a solution to the crisis?
No, because I don't think anything useful has come out of any of the policy reform discussions with respect to financial reform.
They give us answers we aren't always prepared for.
What are the chances that the report would make Israeli authorities to review their policies towards the Palestinians?
Oh, probably zero.
This recession will be even worse than it was in 2008.
But that would be the nasty way for it to happen,
But because of Guantanamo, the U.S. is no longer taking so many prisoners, so instead of taking prisoners, they kill people.
A lot of people think that he's now unelectable and a bad leader.
Wow, there's just so much information to take in.
Pay attention, there'll be a test on this later.
Taking notes.
Welcome to the show.
Wow, this is crazy. We're definitely talking sci-fi over here. From 20 years ago, people would never have believed this. Crazy times we're living in.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around this story. This is a fantastic story.
Yes, it is a fantastic story, and it's a worldwide problem.
Welcome to the party.
And we are back on The Backstory. And in the next 10 minutes or so, we'll take calls at the top of the hour. If anyone wants to call 202-521-1320. And so I don't know how to phrase this right, John. But, I was listening to Robert Bridge. Great appearance as usual.
Excellent.
And because I'm on the right, and I know a lot of people on the right, what I know is if I sit down and talk to people, if I grabbed a random person at CPAC, I'm talking grassroots people, not people like John Bolton, because you saw what Bolton is basically saying that we need to have war with Russia.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Right. He's irrational.
And I'm saying there are those, John McCain, very anti-Russia. Mitt Romney, very anti-Russia.
Yes.
And some of that, by the way, the Romney thing, because Russia's had issues with the Church of Latter-day Saints, what you find is people like Glenn Beck, who's LDS, and Romney, who's obviously LDS, Mormon, to a person, Huntsman, right?
Yep.
they're very anti-Russian, but I get that. And what I mean by that is I understand that because of the issues between the Church of Latter-day Saints and Russia, where Russia basically banned the kind of aggressive evangelism that the Church of Latter-day Saints does.
You know what? That's a very interesting observation, Lee. And I have to agree with you that I think there might be something to it. It's the same situation in Greece. You know, it's a part of the Greek constitution that to be Greek, like really ethnically Greek, you have to be Orthodox, Catholic, Jewish, or Muslim, because those four faiths are indigenously Greek, right? So if you are LDS, if you are Seventh-day Adventist, or any of these other proselytizing faiths, and you go to Greece, you're going to be under arrest more quickly than you're even going to realize. And then you're going to be expelled from the country. The same thing in Russia. You know, if you're a Mormon and you're going door to door with your white shirt and your name tag, trying to convert people to your faith, you're going to promptly be arrested. And if you're lucky, expelled from the country. If you're not lucky, prosecuted and then expelled from the country. So there may be something to it.
Because when Bill Browder's been making the rounds, for instance, he does not have a stauncher ally in the media than Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck said, and we played the audio on the show before, Glenn Beck said, if Trump, after Helsinki, when Browder's name came up, and Trump obviously didn't know much about Browder at all, which says a lot about the people around Trump. But Glenn Beck had Browder on the Glenn Beck program, on the Blaze or whatever.
Right.
And Glenn Beck said, I would drop my support for Trump if he did anything to you, Bill Browder. And I'm saying very, very aggressive support. And I really do think part of it is that he's LDS. And again, look, I tend to be more in favor of freedom and that if a religion's proselytizing, in a sense, it's a free speech issue. That's my view on it, okay? So what the way Russia deals with that, or the way you said Greece deals with it, and I'm sure other countries.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And deals with proselytizing. You use that phrase, and it's a good way to put it. And that's why you could hear me hesitate a little bit before, because I want to be clear. A lot of the thing is that they are aggressively evangelical.
Yes.
Right?
They are. Aggressively so. Yes.
Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists. These are groups, right? How often do Orthodox people, Greek Orthodox, let's say, because you know that better, how often do you guys go door to door?
Literally never.
Right.
We're a very welcoming faith because we consider ourselves to be one of the original faiths. We were founded by the Apostle Andrew, and so my own church in Falls Church, Virginia, we have African Americans, not just Ethiopians who also are Orthodox, but African Americans who have converted. We have Asians. We have a lot of people who marry into the Orthodox faith. So we're a multi-racial, multi-ethnic faith, but we do not proselytize.
Now,
it's just not something that we have ever done.
I don't know. I didn't get close, but I may have seen proselytizing Greek Orthodox because I saw a couple guys in the neighborhood riding bikes and breaking plates as they went. So they're going down the road. You see what I'm saying? I got my Greek joke in there. Anyone ever been to a Greek restaurant will get that joke. Otherwise, you won't know what the hell I'm talking about. But the proselytizing part, the aggressive, and by the way, I think this is part of the problem they've had with Scientology in Russia, which they've also had problems with.
That's right.
Right? Right?
Yes,
because
they have.
Anyone who's
there was even a 60 Minutes
on Hollywood Boulevard. Right. How often do the Greek Orthodox ask people if they want to take a personality test?
Right. And then hook you up to a machine.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
And so on one hand, I am in favor of freedom of speech, and I guess my libertarian tendencies would be, if someone wants to do that, well, you know what? Everyone goofs on those people, right? Yeah. But the fact is, and I'll use the LDS Church as an example, because the LDS Church has had they've been fairly successful in some countries, like in South America, for instance, right?
Yes. And in the South Pacific, you go to Guam, for example, or to there's an American one and an independent one. Anyway, you go to these island nations in the South Pacific, and there are large LDS presences there, and they're all converts.
And part of the problem is these are relatively new religions, because I assume, 2,000 years ago, the people on whatever the landmass was that became the Philippine Islands, I'm guessing 1,000 years ago, those people weren't Catholic. That's my guess.
I would make that same guess.
So the Catholic Church has done its share of proselytizing, but it was, 1,000, 1,500 years ago. Sure. And it was, the Mormons have, bikes and white shirts, and the Catholics had the rack. So it's not quite the same. They had torture devices, but, they but you see what I'm saying? It's because they were older. They did it 1,000, 1,500 years ago.
Yeah.
These religions are newfangled. They're a few hundred years old, right? Or less.
Exactly.
And so, one of the differences between a religion and a cult is a newfangled one. A religion, it's too bad we don't have Carter Laren on right now, because I'd just say Carter, and then he would talk for 5 minutes. It'd be easy. But that being said, my libertarian tendencies tend to go that way, but I'm also not Russian, and I don't live in Russia. And if I did live in Russia, I'm not any of those religions, and I'm not going door to door trying to convince anybody of anything. And on a free speech basis, I also kind of question that. But I think they see, like you're pointing out, in some places that's been very successful. And I can see where culturally that might be concerning for some people. Anyway, we're taking your calls after this. 202-521-1320. I'm Lee Stranahan with my partner, John Kiriakou, bringing you better, deeper, occasionally weirder conversations on Backstory.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are back for the second hour of the best damn talk show in the world. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan.
And I'm former CIA officer John Kiriakou.
And this is The Backstory. Once again, want to thank Robert Bridge for joining us from Moscow. Great appearance by Robert. And this hour, we'll be talking to Ted Rall. We'll be getting to your calls in 1 second after I say something. I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression on The Backstory. Because actually, we got into an interesting talk about some of these new religions, John. But I'll just finish this point, and then Medea in Australia, we'll get to you in 1 second. Thanks for calling. But the point I was trying to make is, and I stopped myself from making it, is that I could sit down with the average Republican I knew who just had a bad feeling about Russia or whatever. And I feel like I could talk to them. Think about the average person you know who's Republican, John, who's not a professional Republican. You know what I'm saying? They're grassroots.
Right.
But I don't think I could sit down with the average Democrat and have the same thing. Because, for instance, on the issue that Robert was talking about, Putin basically saying these drag queen story hour things are nuts or whatever. Yeah. Or women and men competing if in athletics, if the man says he's a woman. Did you see recently we had a coach quit on women's swimming team, a coach for women's swimming here in the U.S. Did you see this, John?
No, I didn't see that.
Well, okay, this is one of the interesting things. There's a reason you didn't see it. Did you see the video of this dude, looks like a lady, this dude who's competing against women in swimming? Did you see any of that video?
No, I sure didn't.
Oh, okay, you can find it.
That's kind of odd because I try to keep up on things like that. Also, just FYI, breaking news, the Ghislaine Maxwell jury has a verdict.
Do we know what it is, or they just announced that they have?
They just announced that they're coming back in with a verdict.
Okay, well, so we'll break. Feel free to keep on top of that, John, because it's harder for me to look. When that comes in, let us know. But there's video.
No, but I didn't see this this report.
Well, what happened was at a recent swim match where this guy was doing it, he literally lapped all of the women he was competing against by like 3 laps, and you could hear the crowd. All they cared about was who came in second, because as far as they were concerned, whoever came in second came in first. Does that make sense?
Right, of course. Of course. And can I add something to that?
Yeah, sure.
I've mentioned several times already that I'm visiting my sister. And my sister is one of these highly educated, very bright professional people who happens to be a Democrat, kind of an independent Democrat, less independent than I am. But she and I had a disagreement about this very issue yesterday. And it shocked me that we disagreed. She thinks that if you wake up one morning and decide you're a woman, then by God, you're a woman. Or if you wake up and decide you're a man, then you're a man. And I said, I thought that was nonsense. Another thing, too, that we disagreed about today is, I have a lot of friends who are of Hispanic ancestry, and they resent the term Latinx. Not because they necessarily disagree that, somebody can be non-binary and is neither Latino or Latina, but because this word Latinx has been imposed upon them by white people who are trying to be politically correct. I think we're in a state of confusion right now. And I don't think either side is terribly successful at convincing the other side of their position. But I'm with you, Lee. I just don't see the fairness in something like this. I don't see it at all.
And this woman, who was a woman's coach in swimming, quit over it because she felt like she was born a woman. She woke up and decided she's a woman. She's still a woman, in other words. But she thought this was unfair to all the other women on the swim team who were born women and woke up the morning of the swim meet and decided they were women. By the way, if those women had woke up and decided that they were men and competed in swimming, they would have woke up the next morning and said, hey, I came in last place. Right?
Right.
You notice
exactly.
that?
Exactly.
No.
You heard the joke about the 30-year-old that won the national Pee Wee football championship. He identifies as an 8-year-old. I mean, is that what's next?
Yeah, horse racing could be. But, I was a little worried because I thought you were going to go, when we were talking about swimming, and I thought you were going to go full Johnny the Greek and say that you thought that men were more buoyant.
Oh, my God. Do you remember that?
Yeah, we'll see. Oh. I knew you would get the reference.
Oh,
but
yeah.
That's all. I'm not even going to explain that one.
That's still a scandal in the Greek-American community.
Okay, let's go to Medea in Australia, because we got 4. Who we got after? You said we got 4 calls. What do we got, Saul? Sharif, Lewis, and Robert after this. Okay, but first, Medea in Australia, what's on your mind?
Hi, yeah, my mind is I want to say I've been reading an article from the Horn of Africa, how the U.S. are doing a regime change in Somalia.
Yeah. The U.S. I think is always going to support regime change in Somalia, no matter who's in the White House, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, only because of the presence of Shabab, the terrorist group that is affiliated with Al-Qaeda. So long as members of Shabab are going into Kenya and Tanzania and attacking hotels and attacking shopping malls and training to wage war against the United States, we're going to be all about regime change and all about propping up whatever Somalis identify themselves as pro-American. That policy is a mess, and it's not getting any better.
And I would say also it's because, meanwhile, while we're saying that, we were supporting Al-Qaeda in places like Syria, for instance.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Right? So we don't have any consistency on that. And people here may not know Al-Shabaab from Shish Kebab or whatever.
Yes.
One of them is the Youth, and it's a terror group. Yeah. And it's not yummy. So you can figure that out. But America, so few people know that we support Al-Qaeda in Syria. They really do. They just don't know that. They think because we say that we oppose them, we do. But we do some places sometimes, but we support them other places other times, right? I mean, right?
That's right. That's right. Now, some idiots in Washington would call that foreign policy. That's a foreign policy based on realism. I would argue that it is hypocritical and foolish. It is not a foreign policy based on realism. It's a foreign policy based on either wishful thinking or very, very poor analysis. I defy anybody in Washington to show me that Al-Qaeda is more desirable than Bashar al-Assad. It can't be done.
And speaking of hypocrisy in the Middle East and relating it to the last issue, then I'll go to Sharif. But the idea, you hear Putin attacked for his position on LGBT issues, and because Putin's the enemy. Have you ever heard somebody, do you know who's got LGBT issues? Our ally, Saudi Arabia, right?
And let me interrupt you. Lee. Ghislaine Maxwell was found guilty.
Wow, on
it says
what?
Here, this is from the Associated Press. Ghislaine Maxwell convicted of helping Jeffrey Epstein sexually abuse teenage girls in a trial seen as a chance to hold both her and the late financier accountable. This is a developing story.
And we'll see what happens after this, but that's a big deal. And we'll talk with Ted Rall about it coming up. But just asking before we get to Tarif, have you ever heard anyone in a position of authority come out and say, you know what? Saudi Arabia may not be great on LGBT issues either, right? Because they're not.
And Saudi Arabia is a hell of a lot worse on a lot of these issues than Syria is. You know, I've said this before. In Syria, you have women, you have Christians that are represented in the cabinet, in the parliament. There's an operating synagogue in central Damascus. I know because I've been to it. Christians have churches all over the country. It's, you know, one of the cradles of early Christianity. And Christians and Muslims live side by side in Syria. It's nothing at all like Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, very interesting. 202-521-1320. Tarif, thanks for holding. Tarif, what is on your mind?
Thank y'all for taking my call. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange. And Fauci's NIH is used to experiment on children in New York by reports by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Cecilia Farber. They have my first comment. I have two comments. My first comment is dealing with a story that came out with Russian Today tweeted Danish radio documentary. The Search is Myself did a documentary on children that was experimented on by the CIA. And back in the early 60s, they was looking for psychopaths and schizophrenia and other type of stuff. And they basically was messing with these children's mind back in the 60s. I shared a link with y'all to y'all tweet for today. So, in my second comment is dealing with, I was listening to the Duran as McCurris. They was talking about, he was saying that the Zyklon missile, the Russians launched a salvo of them testing out the missiles in one of those, I think in the Baltic or the Atlantic Oceans. But that was meant to send the message to the U.S. that if they get in a war with the U.S., then they'll use the missiles to sink the ships, basically. And also the S-550 missile program is not 10 years away from us right now. It's already been developed and is going into active service as we speak alongside with the S-500, which means the S-550 can knock down U.S. satellites. You know, basically knocking out all the communications where the U.S. have to rely on. So it was a show of force, and that's what they had put out there to basically let the U.S. know that the Zyklon missile and also the S-550 missile. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, well, Tarif, great call as usual. John, only because I want to get to other callers and make sure we have enough time. Do you have any thoughts on what Tarif said?
I do. Just real quickly, what Tarif is talking about relative to Dr. Fauci, I think lacks a little context. Fauci's NIH in the early 2000s did a study in New York City that included foster children who were HIV positive. They participated in clinical trials for new AIDS medication. 25 of those children died. There's no evidence that any of them died as a result of the medication. They died of AIDS. This was first reported by a group called Unite America First, with a headline, Dr. Fauci Stein funded experimenting with AIDS orphans while 25 died. The Vera Institute, which first reported on this experiment, specifically said there were 532 children who participated in the clinical studies between 1985 and 2005. 25 of them died. All of them died of AIDS, not from the medication. So Robert Kennedy ought to tighten up his facts there.
Well, I will say this too. You know, I've talked about this before, but I think people focus too much on Anthony Fauci. I don't think he should be in the position. On the other hand,
I agree with that as well. Yes.
And on the other hand, we're at a point now that there could be video out of Anthony Fauci strangling a cute little puppy dog to death with his bare hands and then throwing it at the, in front of the video. Yeah. And the people who like Fauci will have no problem with it. And the people who don't like Fauci will say, he needs to be arrested. He's not going to be arrested. He needs to be sued. He's not going to be. Anthony Fauci is going to die at some point, as we all will, and he will die a wealthy and largely liked, and I know that's hard for people to believe, but, we're at a point where nobody I've said this before too, John, nobody in the public eye has a 70% approval rating, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
And maybe you'll get some celebrities who, people like Betty White, for instance. Okay. You get
she said today that the reason she's made it to 100 is that she tries to never eat anything green.
Well, there you go. That's especially important when you're dealing with meat. But with Fauci, I just think that there's too many people focused on him, and it makes people feel good on social media, especially sometimes if you're Rand Paul in Congress, to say Fauci needs to be indicted. Fauci's not going to be indicted. Everybody,
no, he's not. No.
And by the way,
no. Did you see that there was a charge of crimes against humanity filed against him in the International Criminal Court last week? A friend of mine sent it to me, and nothing of the sort is going to happen to Fauci. He's not going to be arrested. He's not going to be indicted. He's not going to be jailed. None of that is going to happen. Period.
And by the way, you know who's not going to? Let me name two other people who aren't going to spend time in prison. Ready? Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Neither. Right. John, do you agree?
That's right. It's not going to happen.
And a lot of people, there's very few people who want them both doing time together. But a lot of people want Hillary, lock her up, and Trump, lock him. Guess what? No one's getting locked up.
No.
Sorry. This is not going to happen. Now, by the way, we'll talk to Ted Rall about the Ghislaine Maxwell thing. I'm going to go to, we got Lewis first, right? Lewis, then Robert. Lewis, Robert, then Ingrid. Okay. We'll talk about the Ghislaine Maxwell thing with Ted Rall a little bit, but note to our interpretive producer, Rod, let's see, it's our last show of the week before a 3-day New Year's weekend. We should see about getting ads on one more time.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yes, we need Addie. Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And then we'll be able to cover it. Because, the Ghislaine Maxwell thing, okay, she's been found guilty. You know what? I don't think it changes the media is not suddenly going to pay it. Oh, wait, she got found guilty? They'll just
we
write
should
that.
Cover this now. Right.
She was found guilty, then they'll go right back to ignoring it. But we'll talk about that more with Ted and with Addie. Lewis, what is on your mind?
Yes, it's great to be on your show, and thank you. A couple of things. I first of all want to respond to some of the things you were saying about people trying to convert people around the world. Let's talk about this country. Who are the people that were torturing in Guantanamo? They are identified by the people who are torturing as Christians, for the most part, right?
Yep, that's right.
And, waterboarding, torturing people, hanging them upside down, and the rest of which was reported by the Congress in full even though some of it was kept out, was classified. So let me also mention that, you know, the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, are both Cold Warriors, first and always Cold Warriors. And so everything that comes out of Biden's mouth is essentially scripted particularly by Blinken. I don't think Joe Biden has a foreign policy issue that he has thought about very deeply. He's a Cold Warrior. He's been a Cold Warrior, and he will always be a Cold Warrior. And so I have to say that. Also, let's remember that this country persists on being exceptionalist. American exceptionalism is taught in the schools from grade 6 up and in colleges. And so why is it that why not? Children grow up thinking that we are exceptional. As Barack Obama himself said, we are exceptional. Every president in our lifetimes has said those same words. It's like a script. The United States is the greatest nation on the face of the earth. What does that mean? That leaves out the other 184 other countries. What are they, sliced cheese? So, lastly, I'll say about sexual predation. I happen to have read an article by John Kiriakou in the magazine Covert Action magazine, in which he reported, this has not been reported in mainstream media, that several CIA people were indicted, one of whom in particular, for sexual porn of children. And
child sex crimes.
Sex crimes, sharing pictures around in the office and sending them on.
The United States was divinely inspired. The Constitution was divinely inspired. And that we're the greatest country in the world because God made us this way. And first of all, that's silly. And secondly, it's dangerous.
Well, I think I want to make sure we get to Robert and Ingrid, so I'm going to say this briefly. But there's a secular version of that exceptionalism, and has to do with the things that are unique about the United States. The U.S. is unique. The founding of the U.S., and especially the first 100 years, let's say, it was a country founded on a set of principles, and it was Enlightenment era principles. It was not like the French, for instance, which not knocking their revolution, but it came after, a long...
Yeah, but I would disagree with you in that, well, actually, coincidentally, today is the anniversary of the massacre at Wounded Knee. And I think that Native Americans would disagree that what we perpetrated against them was necessarily, enlightened.
Well, what you're pointing out is a contradiction to the principles, to the extent that it's true. But also, do you know who was else killing Indians? Was other Indians. Native Americans were killing each other. They were going tribe to tribe. They were not nice, period. They were not nice, and they were cruel and violent, and it was not all a Neil Young song. He's got a few songs about that. Cortez the Killer, for instance, where it's sort of like the Indians were all happy. They would play, some of the Native Americans would play soccer with people's heads, right? And I'm just saying that when people like to point that out, that, America's bad, compared to what and who? Name the country at the time that was doing better. Name the country. Because it certainly wasn't the Navajo Nation or whatever. It wasn't. People like to point out stuff, but there's a reason that at that point, the late 1700s, early 1800s, there were places on the planet where people were not civilized. I don't know how to put it. They weren't even civilized. The technology had not caught up. Their understanding of the world had not caught up. It was stuck in a position that the U.S. and a lot of countries in Europe had left behind 1,000 years before. So I think that even on that stuff, there's a certain context dropping that happens with that. But that's my take. That's my brief take. My brief sloppy take. 202-521-1320. Robert, want to make sure we get to you. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind?
Hey, guys, I just got to second your opinion right there, because everything you said was on the money. I'm saying, with America, I'm saying we got to love our country. But over the weekend, I was watching some of the political shows, and they had one of the Afghan families on that was living on one of our military bases, and the husband, who supposedly helped us in some type of way, they got on the plane and got over here, was saying how he loves democracy or whatever, but the whole time he was talking about it, the woman, the wife, supposedly, you could see in her facial expressions that she didn't agree with anything. She didn't even want to be in this country right now. What's your opinion? Guys?
Yeah, and by the way, just a quick note to Saul. What we'll do is we'll go to a break. Then when we come back, I'll bring on Ted. Then I'll bring on Ingrid. So anyway, John, go ahead. What say you, sir?
I agree, first of all. But I think we're going to see a lot of that. I think that a lot of the Afghans who helped us and were able to, make their way to the United States have no understanding at all of what American culture is. And there are a lot of women who want to be covered. They want to be veiled. They want to wear burqas. They see our, TV shows. They see women walking around in shorts and men walking around with no shirts on, and they think that people are copulating in the streets because that's what they're taught in their schools. This is going to be a really, really rough cultural adjustment for a lot of them, and a lot of them aren't going to make it. They're going to end up going back or moving to the Middle East. This is not the promised land for a lot of people. Culturally, it's just too different.
Yeah, and Robert bringing up Afghanistan. The thing I was saying about some people in the late 1700s not being civilized. John, you were in Afghanistan. I would say the same thing applies there now, right?
No, I would agree. The same thing applies in Saudi Arabia now.
Right. I was just, it occurred to me because you mentioned Afghanistan. There we go. When we come back, we'll be joined by Bon Vivant, Ted Rall, and we'll bring on Ingrid. So Ingrid, sit tight, and we'll bring you on after I bring on Ted on The Backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back, 105.5 FM AM 1390 in Washington, D.C. And we'll get to Ingrid in 1 second. But first, let's bring on our guest. By the way, quick programming note, we will not be on Friday. Enough said. Now, joining us from New York, the home of the injustice being done to Mossad's bisexual socialite community, John. It's not fair.
Excellent.
Ted Rall, author, artist, bon vivant. Hey, Ted, how you doing?
I'm good. Like you, I mourn Ms. Maxwell.
Yes.
Really.
She's in for it now, man. She's in for it now. This is not going to be easy.
That's true.
And unless she shares a cell with Pam Grier, it's going to be like a 70s exploitation film, John. Get Russ Meyer out of the grave to direct this one. But let's go too quickly. Ingrid in D.C., thanks for holding. And you're on, and so is Ted Rall. So Ted may have something to say about what you have to say, but I don't know what you have to say. So, Ingrid, what do you have to say?
Well, thanks for taking my call. Your first guest from Moscow mentioned how quickly they passed a law against promoting things to minors. And I don't normally, the LGBT thing doesn't really affect me. I don't pay much attention. But today, on my news feed, there was a story suggesting, and it had a family, mother, father, 2 young children, looked to be about 5 and 7, and smiling, almost like they'd won the lottery. And the implication was this was the family in the story. The headline was, "Watch how adorably this child tells their parents that they are non-binary." And I don't know. I was frankly a little grossed out. This is just, it's not directed to minors, but anybody can read this story. And if this is like coming off in the MSM constantly, this is promoting strange things to very young children.
Well, also, let me say this. One of the things is they're taking the Q out of LGBTQ because the Q stands for queer. And there's a tradition, a fairly long tradition, of people who were, who turned out to be gay. I'm thinking of the British, John, and artists for a long time who were, I'll put it like this. Queer is kind of the opposite of normal by definition, right? That by definition, it's the opposite. So as soon as you try to normalize something, and I've heard this from some people who consider themselves queer, they're like, well, why are we trying to normalize this? They're like, I like this because it's not normal. That's why I like it. And so it's a weird contradiction where they're trying to say, oh, it's adorable for a kid to say they're non-binary. I don't know. I guess I don't know. No one would have thought of that before. On the other hand, no one would necessarily been horrified. It would just be like, you know why it would be adorable? because they don't know what they're talking about. When kids talk about things that is above their level of understanding, it's often a
gay. I understand the idea of trying to reclaim the word and to turn it from a negative into a positive. I get that. But I don't understand how it differs. Like, you read some of these advice columns and somebody will say, I'm gay, but my partner is queer. Well, what the heck does that mean? I don't understand that. One of my kids told me that what it is people of this generation don't like to be labeled, and it's a way of confusing labels and thus making them irrelevant. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the way I'm hearing it.
Well, that may be their understanding now, but I don't think that's the way it came up. And I was thinking of people like Oscar Wilde is who I was thinking of earlier. That you had people like Oscar Wilde. You had people who were ostentatious. Liberace, I would say, right?
Yeah,
is a fairly modern example of someone who is extremely flamboyant. Little Richard would be another example of somebody who presented themselves in a certain way. And you know what? And I guarantee you, I'll compare Liberace with another well-known person who turned out to be gay, is Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson presented differently. Does that make sense? And
right.
It's not that I don't think that Liberace was being more authentic. He was just I'll put it like this: Jimi Hendrix liked dressing flamboyantly.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't a sexuality thing. He was a rock star, and he thought it looked cool. And you know what? It's hard to argue with. So that's what I'm saying. It's that tradition of like Oscar Wilde, and then it comes down through people like Liberace and Little Richard and Elton John, and you can go on. But it's not strictly about sexuality. Does that make sense at all, Ted?
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think that's right, Lee. I mean, my understanding, look, like John, I seriously, the word queer in the LGBTQA universe seems redundant to me. And from what I understand, what it sort of just means is that you just refuse, you could actually be, there are apparently young people who self-identify as queer who are nevertheless cis, heteronormative in their sexual behavior. And so, so in the old ways of defining these things, they don't, we would say, well, that person's straight. Jimi Hendrix, as far as I know, was straight, but since you mentioned him, but as far, but maybe today someone like him could self-identify as queer. These labels have become so fluid as to almost, they're in danger from an ontological standpoint of becoming meaningless. You can self-identify as trans. My son is applying for colleges, and I did a deep dive on like what the meanings were here of each category, and you can self-identify as trans and really kind of, by the standards of even 10 or 20 years ago, you would not have been considered trans at all at that time. But now you could self-identify. You don't have to change anything about yourself. You can be, I could self-identify as trans and not change anything, and it would just be totally acceptable.
Good.
Are you planning on entering a swim meet or something, Ted?
No such plans, but you never know.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's again, you're bon vivant. It's possible. But Ingrid, thanks for the call. Now, Saul, you said we had someone with a question for Ted Rall. Okay, so Luis has a question for Ted about something I want to, but before I say that, let me just mention this about Hendrix. Did you guys know that Jimi Hendrix was wearing women's clothes?
No, I did not know that.
If you look at the standard thing, what Hendrix was dressed in, a lot of paisley and stuff like that, right?
Right.
He would go to like thrift shops in London and buy granny clothes that people's grandmother had left at the thrift shop.
Oh my gosh.
No, seriously, go look at the way Hendrix is dressed.
Yeah, I knew that. I knew that, actually. And you know how you can tell? Because women's clothes fold over on the other side, right? You know, like if you look at a blouse versus a men's shirt.
Right.
A men's shirt, right? So, and that goes back to the Middle Ages when a man would keep his dagger under his blouse, and so in order to indicate that a woman was a woman and not a man and might not and could not have a dagger because everyone was assumed to be right-handed, the fold over was done the other way.
Oh, that's very interesting. I did not know that part. But yeah, you know, what Hendrix would do is he would mix and match. So he'd have that and then maybe a vest or something. You know what I'm saying, John? But if you look at it, once you realize he was going to London thrift shops and getting grandmother clothes, you'll see it. But he made it work because he was the Garanimals of rock stars, I guess. He was mix and matching, right? Different stuff. And it just worked for him. But yeah, literally he was wearing women's clothes and everyone thought it was cool. And you know what? Everyone was right because it's Hendrix. 202-521-1320. Louise, you have a question for Ted Rall. Go on, Louise.
Excuse me. First, I have a second. Ingrid's main point, which was, and I second it very strongly, which was keep all this Weimar perversion, bizarre stuff strictly away from children, and it's not being kept away from them. They're being exposed to it. But here's my question for Ted Rall. What does he think of Mélenchon? I've listened to a lot of Mélenchon on the internet, and I think I agree with practically everything he has to say, and he's about the only person in the universe who seems to be saying it. So does...
No, who's she? Ted, you know who she's talking about? Because I don't.
Yes, he's a big-time... He's basically the Bernie Sanders of France, except, of course, because it's France, the left is further left.
Right.
Okay, and what's his name again? I thought she was talking about the German mime group Momenchance, but that's not what she said.
Mélenchon is his name.
John Mélenchon.
Okay, I was close. But okay, so Ted, what are his? When you say he's like the Bernie Sanders, is he running for office or is he a public intellectual? What is he?
He's like Bernie Sanders. He's running for office. He's a presidential prospect. He's the head of his own party, and look. If I were in France, I would as the head of his own personal political party that also swept the French Parliament and kind of destroyed, in some sense, in one election, parliamentary democracy as the French have known it for decades, which has been, for all of its faults, extremely diverse politically from far left to far right and very vibrant. And, it's kind of almost been like a one-man state. And the National Front clearly sees an opening here. And, the Yellow Vest movement has some conservative right-wing nationalist, tinges to it, not all of it, but some of it. So anyway, he's back. What Mélenchon is back to basics. He's your standard issue, 1960s style French socialist, Marxist, Leninist socialist who wants to restore the role of the state, the primary role of the state in running the economy and most of the most basic essentials of life. So, you would say, if you looked at, say, sort of a standard Marxist-Leninist of 1968, you'd be like, well, he looks a lot like this.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Ted, I want to ask you a little bit about New York, if I could. My brother's in New York right now. He's been there, the last 4 or 5 days with his family. They debated for a long time whether or not to go. and they said that most of what they wanted to do was shut down. They had tickets to a couple of shows. They wanted to go to a handful of restaurants that they always go to. The only one that was open was Peter Luger's. But he said the things that were still open were absolutely packed, like skating at Rockefeller Center. In the meantime, we're seeing reports from the New York Post, the New York Times, that the governor is, prepared to declare a state of emergency. There were 97 deaths yesterday from COVID, which is the highest, ever. What the heck is happening in New York? How is this new surge playing out there?
Well, it's we are effectively in what they call a soft lockdown, which is to say a lot of things are closed not by government fiat, but because of the labor shortages and because and because people are out and because the labor shortage is exacerbated by the fact that so many people have COVID. So basically, even though obviously there's these dramatic death numbers, there's the reaction is sort of a hodgepodge. I'd say it's a wide range. I mean, some New Yorkers are definitely totally relaxed about this and walking around in the streets without masks and even on the subway, like venturing on without masks. And they're kind of over the whole lockdown mentality and they're not worried about Omicron. And they think if they get it, fine, because they'll get the antibodies that, and it's not that severe and most people are vaccinated here, so whatever. But other people are just downright terrified and they're just, bunkered up and staying in their homes and just ordering in. I mean, this thing is sweeping through with insane rapidity. And it's not a replay of a year ago. It's sort of like it's a fast forward. And it's like we know that it's not as severe for most people who are vaccinated, but it is still so fast, nobody knows what's happening. I mean, school is supposed to resume next week. And right now, the word is, well, the schools will be open and there's going to be, if they're not going to, what had been going on was if there was any 1 or 2 or 3 cases of COVID in a class, that entire class would go to virtual. Now they're saying, no, that's not true. That what they'll do is send testing kits home with every student, but there aren't any testing kits. So what are they talking about? And so, nobody believes they're going to have the testing kits. So parents are just like, well, maybe school's not starting next week, or maybe it is. Or I think the general feeling here is this is just going to be a really bad month, and then this wave is going to pass, and we'll be through it. It feels really bad, but it feels very short.
Okay. Good.
Now that's it. The industry. Forget geography for a second. The airline industry is also in that soft lockdown thing, because again, they've canceled a lot more flights recently, John, and it's exactly what Ted was saying about New York. It's people not showing up, right? People aren't showing up for work for whatever, a variety of reasons, some of which it may be that they're just worried. I heard someone from the flight attendants, one of the airline unions, saying that they didn't like the fact that they moved the quarantine date from 10 days to 5 days, because what it effectively means is that they're sending people out who are going to give other people COVID. That's what they said, this union rep. So in other words, I think if people don't like the people who are like anti-lockdown, anti-vaccine, and so on, they assume that everybody, if people aren't showing up, well, they're protesting. You know what? Some of them aren't protesting. Some of them are afraid of getting COVID themselves, right? Some of them may be protesting. I don't know. But some of them clearly are afraid of getting COVID themselves, and they're not showing up. And the person who called this over a year ago was our frequent guest, Mark Frost, John, who said the before the government did a thing, people stopped showing up. So it's interesting, Ted, that you're saying and John, John, you were pointing out that the places your brother went, and so Ted are packed. Are you seeing this kind of thing where, on one hand, people are afraid of catching COVID, on the other hand, that they want to go out? Are you seeing both, Ted?
Yeah, it depends on the personality of the person, right? Individuals. So, and I would say if there's a common thread that goes beyond the psychology, there's also the boosters. It seems to me like among my friends and acquaintances, people who have a booster really are like a lot more likely to venture outside and go and attend things. People who don't have boosters are feeling squeamish, and that's probably about right.
Yeah. That probably is right. Yeah, I'm as worried about COVID as the next guy, but I'm vaccinated and I'm boosted. I wear a mask. I wash my hands all the time. So I've gone out and done everything that I wanted to go out and do. Going to see the Harlem Globetrotters as soon as this show ends. So, just be safe, wash your hands. Nothing else we can do.
Yeah, it is a weird time. Now, you're talking about Mayor de Blasio, but I don't mean this in a morbid way, but his days as mayor are numbered. He's out of there over the weekend. And what's been so he has nothing to lose if he pisses off people. Has there been a determination on whether Times Square, what's happening at Times Square, Ted?
So the latest determination, things are moving very quickly. The latest is that Times Square is going to be limited. So what they do is the police every year, they have gates at all the side streets, and they let a certain number of people in general for safety and crowd control purposes. But basically, if you want to go, you can go. This year, they say it's going to be limited to, I think, 15,000 is what I last heard. So they're going to sit there with clickers and just try to limit the crowds. So in order to sort of create de facto social distancing, I'm going to say personally, Times Square is not as big as it looks on TV. It's not really that big. And 15,000 people is a lot of people for that space. Although obviously more have been in there. I have no reason to say this except pure speculation, but I would not be at all surprised if by Friday, which is just 2 days away, that they decide to scale it back further. I mean, the Omicron is just completely out of control here, and you might even have trouble finding 15,000 people who want to be at Times Square on New Year's Eve.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree. Scientists still think that Omicron is less serious, less severe than Delta, of course. But there's no guarantee if you catch it, you're going to catch Omicron. Delta's still out there. It's still killing people. I wouldn't take a chance on something like New Year's Eve. It's just not worth it. To do what? To watch that stupid ball drop? Come on.
I would never go there. I mean, Times Square.
No. It's like the last place I would want to be.
Ever. I mean, forget about Omicron. I mean, just in general, it's hell. I never wanted to be there when I was a young guy. It's, I've walked through after a night of partying, after it was all over, through the mountains of litter being cleaned up at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I was always like, wow, this is just absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, that's one of those things I never did or had a desire to do either. Now, let me ask you this. In the couple minutes we have left, Ted, we only have a couple minutes, but this is perfect because I'm going to ask you for a short answer. This is just a pure interest, sort of philosophical question. You, as someone on the, I will say, it's fair to say, far left, if you have a sort of one sentence or one phrase distinction between the left and the right, when someone says left or right, how do you, because for instance, the way I define it in my head, the short version is that people on the left are more in favor of the government involvement in things People on the right are in favor of less government involvement. Now, again, I'm not trying to get into nuances here, and I could argue against my own point. But how do you view that distinction, Ted, between left and right? What's your take on that?
I think the big distinction is that the left believes that the government has more responsibilities to provide services to its citizens than the right does. The left believes that lefties think that if something is an essential of life, healthcare, transportation, education, those kind of things should be provided by the state using tax money. That no one should go without food or shelter or anything that's important to survive, to live. And no matter, even if they don't work, even if they're lazy, none of that matters. They should be provided just because our society is rich enough to do so. I think on the right, those guarantees are much fewer, or in some cases, non-existent. And I think also in America, the left and the right have to be distinguished by what kind of country we imagine ourselves. I think American leftists view the country as a place where individual rights and privileges are enshrined first and foremost. But I think the American conservatives view the military and economic power of the United States as an empire, as one of the absolute top priorities of what this country needs to be, and that it's not a great country unless it's militarily and economically powerful.
Very interesting. Ted Rall, thanks so much for joining us. Once again, always a lot of fun to have you on the show. Great appearance by Ted Rall. And thanks to Robert Bridge. John, another great show. And tomorrow is the last day of our week here on The Backstory.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Good evening. Welcome to the Critical Hour. We're coming to you from the capital of the United States of America, Washington, D.C., here on Radio Sputnik. I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon. I'm joined here by my co-host, political analyst Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
For the next 2 hours, we will explore and analyze the salient news stories that are impacting the global village in which we live. There's a peace and responsible statecraft